Hello, fellow communicators, and welcome back to Stories Lived, Stories Told. As always, I'm Abbie, and I think it's so important for us to have language around our communication patterns and to have tools and skills that help us communicate better. So with the help of the CMM Institute, we're using this podcast as a space to have this ongoing conversation about how we communicate and how we can be better. Because when we communicate better, everything in our social world gets better. Today we get to have a conversation with John Burnham, a systemic therapist in England who is such a great example of harnessing the power of intentional, thoughtful communication to create better social worlds. This will be a two-part conversation, so if you're left feeling like you're wanting more, don't worry, you will get it. I hope you're able to take what you can from this conversation and apply it to areas of your own life to better understand the communication that's happening in your relationships and to start to grow in the direction you want. So with that, let's begin. John, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, one of the questions I want to start with, since most of our conversation today is going to be you sharing your stories with us, because that's, as you know, a big part of CMM is the storytelling that we do. And so part of my kind of thesis for this podcast is that I want this to be a space where people can learn to share their stories as well as feel heard and hear other people's stories, because I don't believe everyone has always had the space to share their stories. I think people have lots of thoughts and feelings and ideas about their lives and the stories they experience and what happens to them and what they make happen, but they haven't had the space. So this is about that space. So I wanted to ask you, how comfortable do you feel telling your story? Have you had spaces that made you feel safe to tell your story, or have you received messages that kept you from telling your story, or maybe both in different contexts?
Well, I want to tell you two stories.
Please.
About that. One from a long time ago and one right up to present.
Okay.
One was when I was at school, and Sheila McNamee helped me to remember this. She said, John, when did you first become a storyteller? And I couldn't remember. And then about 2 months later, clicked, and I wrote to her and said, I've remembered. The answer to your question. She couldn't remember the question she'd asked. It just goes to show how questions live on, even if the person who asked the questions forgets the question.
Absolutely.
The person who was asked it often remembers it, and it lives on. And I was at school, and I'd been missing a lot of school, playing truant, and I was in danger of being expelled, or at least suspended. And I was called in to see the headmaster. And he said, well, what's this all about? And I told him a story about what things were going on at home, and my dad's drinking and how that was affecting things and so on and so forth, and how I had to do things. And so school became less important. I had to attend to other things, and told him this. And he sat and listened patiently. And at the end he said, well, Burnham, he said, I don't know if a single word of that is true, but you do tell a good story. And I think maybe from then, I don't know if from then, but that sticks in my mind, the power of stories.
Yep.
Now, it was true.
Yes.
It was true. But I took a risk in telling him that.
Right. Absolutely.
I was working class background. I was living in a working class family then, and it was a very middle class school. So telling that story about your disclosing personal distress and things like this, I had been mocked by some of the teachers for that.
Wow. Yeah.
So I took a risk in telling him, and he didn't mock me with that. So the risk was worth taking, and but it did show the power of being able to present yourself in particular ways and through stories and so on. And that he didn't suspend or expel me. Not then, anyway. More recently, I wrote a chapter with Lizette Nolt called Taking the Plunge. And I don't know if you're familiar with the model I founded and then co-developed with Alison Roper Hall called the Social Graces.
Yeah, why don't you explain that a little for my listeners?
It relates to gender, geography, race, religion, age, ability, accent, appearance, class, culture, ethnicity, employment, sexuality, sexual orientation, spirituality, ... S, which stands for something else that we haven't.
Right.
But it was a way that I used to try to remember all of the different aspects of identity and so on. I've always used acronyms to help me remember things, and so that was one thing. And we talked about personal and social graces, and we wrote a chapter together, and she sent me, she's familiar with CMM and other social constructions ideas, she sent me about 10,000 words of theory, which were, I thought, well, she's done that bit, what can I contribute?
Mm-hmm.
And I sat down, and so this is a chapter in a book called Surviving Clinical Psychology Training. So this is for people in training.
Yes.
And I sat down one night and just wrote some of the experiences I'd had, something like the one I've just told you about, but more about that displayed my, at that time, ignorance, displayed my sexism, displayed the things that I was raised in and wasn't aware of. I thought, that's the way life is. I didn't question that.
Yeah.
And so I talked about that and then talked about the process of unbecoming that through the people I met, the families I work with, the colleagues I work with, generous enough to listen to those and to question me about it and to help me to shift positions and open my eyes to things that I didn't think existed. Because I was raised in Newcastle, which at that time was a very monocultural. If we talk about cosmopolitan communication in CMM, it was very monocultural. And until I moved away from it geographically, that opened my eyes.
Right.
And so I talked about the experiences and the process of change. So I had to tell some stories which were people tend not to tell about. I think some people act as if they've always been woke.
Right. Yeah.
They've never had these ideas. I think for people of my generation,
it's just not true.
Possible. It's unlikely.
Yes.
And I think that's influenced by the way people are criticized for things that they said 20 years ago.
Right.
And so I took the risk of saying these things and then describing the process. I gave it to a colleague and she came back and said, John, I think people might be scared about what you've written, might be perturbed. That was after I'd done this, the hardest thing was not to edit.
Yes, that it makes sense. You want to paint yourself in the best light possible, but that might not be the full story. And I think people are tempted to do that, especially if they're writing or talking about themselves. But what I find is that the stories we most want to hear from other people are those really vulnerable ones where we messed up or we didn't get it right, but we learned from it. And I think people want that from other people, but find it hard to do.
Yeah.
We find it hard to do for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. People want transparency, but do they?
Right. Yes. Yeah. Because it can make them uncomfortable. It's like you said, to read, things that you said or thought, but could be a good kind of discomfort, one you would want to lean into. Yeah.
So I put in a reader alert. I said, this is not a cry for help.
Yes.
I put a little box, reader alert. This chapter is about how I process these things and want to let people know that if you're concerned as a trainee about these thoughts and ideas, training is about working them through, not judging you whether you have them or not. I don't think it should be about judging people. That's their experience so far. How they move on with that and what they do with that is another matter. But until you let them out, they can influence you if you keep them quiet. But once they're spoken, it's easier. A nursing colleague of mine, who's now a family therapist, Mark Clegg, said, if it can be mentioned, you would say this to young people, if it can be mentioned, it can be managed.
Absolutely. I think that's really powerful. I just love putting language to things because the experience I've had, like I said, I studied communication. And so in my classes, I was getting all this language for this is how we talk about this conflict style, or this is a dynamic that can happen in families, or this is a pattern that happens in interpersonal relationships. And it wasn't that those were new experiences for me. It was that I had known the experience and had the experience, but I didn't have language to talk about what was going on. And so when I got that language, to me, that's incredibly empowering because I do think if you can't name or put language to a problem, then you certainly can't address it in any way. So I bet that's really powerful, especially for those trainees.
Yeah. As it happens, other chapters in that collection were taking a similar position. And some of the feedback was, I wished I'd had this when I was training. It would have helped be more open and so on. So Lizette Nolt, she became more open about her experience as well. So I'd been open. And so we took that risk together. And I wrote this with Barbara on and supervision called relational integration. And we used CMM in there. And we shared a lot of our history and things like this. So I'm doing that more, taking that risk and hoping that as a trainer, I always think that I shouldn't be I don't expect trainees to do something that I wouldn't be prepared to do myself.
Absolutely.
And so often this is the topic today, or this is what I'm going to, and I will give a personal example. I will take the lead by showing a willingness to share, not I'm sitting here and you share and I keep quiet. It's not that kind of relationship.
Right. It's the vulnerability begets vulnerability. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have found this relationship to storytelling of understanding that when you are able to be vulnerable and take that risk to share your stories, that allows other people to come into that space as well. So yes, I think we've already, gotten into your story a little bit, but I would love to just ask still, because I do think it's ever changing. What is the story that you tell about yourself currently?
The story.
A story, the story. Who are you? Who is John Burnham?
Well, I clinically work in the National Health Service and young people's mental health inpatient unit, and I devote my time mainly to eating disorders. So over the years, I've worked there since January 1977 as my main kind of work base, but I've also worked at KCC in London and other places around the country on a kind of visiting basis. But I work mainly now in multifamily therapy, which is where we get up to 6 to 8 families, all struggling against the influence of anorexia nervosa and other eating disorders. And we have meetings, and I used to do it face-to-face, but now we do it online. And it's a very moving kind of work and really rewarding to see how the community that is built up between the families is such an important resource. And we have what we call graduate families who've been through the program. The young person's left the unit and transferred back into the community. And the families, including the young people, are willing to come back and talk to the people who are currently in the program. We've got about 14 families who do that now, and it really is fantastic. So that's what I do clinically. And I work with sometimes 1 or 2 families individually. I teach on the MSc still. I used to be head of systemic training, but I still work on the program, teaching and supervising. I run the supervision program with Rabina Singh, who's joined me this last year to co-lead it. So I'm travel around and write. I've written about 5 or 6 publications in the last 2-3 years.
You've been busy.
So busy.
Well, that's incredible. What is it for people who don't know what is the supervision program? What does it mean to be a supervisor in your setting?
It means that your ability to do live supervision, to watch somebody as they're working with an individual, couple, or family, and to intervene as the session's in progress, which is a very, very tricky process.
I bet.
It can be ever so helpful to intervene in the middle of things, and it can be ever so unhelpful.
Right.
If you pop a question through or something like that, then somebody might say that, oh, I just didn't know what to do, and just asking that question was helpful to move it along and so on. Or I was just about to do that.
Right. A little too eager.
Yeah, so it's quite a skill, but then to do supervision of people in all sorts of different contexts, both as systemic psychotherapists, but also psychiatrists or psychologists, people in other disciplines. It's interesting. Family therapy supervision is the supervision of a particular method of work.
Okay.
Systemic supervision is an orientation of the supervisor. So it doesn't require to be a family. You're looking at the significant relational system in which the supervisor is embedded. And you're not trying to do their work. You're trying to help them to situate themselves in their work. So systemic supervision, I think, is different level of abstraction from family therapy supervision.
Yeah.
It's interesting that, because when you write stuff and teach, people create a story about themselves. And I'm not sure I have a story. Certainly I don't have the story. One of the ways I think about that is when students ask me something, and I'll say, well, why wouldn't you think that I would be worried about that as well? Or why wouldn't you think I would have difficulty? Or why wouldn't you think this about me? And they say, because you're John Burnham. And while I take that as some mark of appreciation,
right,
and sometimes respect, and appreciate that, I will often say, I don't think I know the John Burnham that you know.
Right.
I don't see myself through the same lens. I know other things about me.
Right. That's a good response.
And my daughters tell a different story about me than you might tell about me. Right. And some of them might overlap, but some of them will be different. I often credited with being very humorous, and I do workshops on humor, and I use humor a lot. And that's come from humor as a survival thing in childhood.
Right.
In very difficult, conflictual, sometimes physically violent situations, or potentially physically violent. If you can say something funny, it often dissolves tension.
Yes.
People laugh instead of fight and being cross and things like that. So I learned that early on. So I don't know whether the context made me or I made the context, or some kind of...
That's a very interesting question, yeah.
Typical relationship there. But I use it. And it's often given credit for that. We really love that humor in this and that and the other and so on. But sitting with my middle daughter one evening, and she was saying something, and I made a humorous crack. And she looked at me very kindly, but very seriously, and said, "Dad, you make a joke out of everything." And that was a moving moment for me, because she said it kindly. She didn't say it critically. Yeah. And she does have that ability to be able to address some very serious things, but in a kind way. And I think that makes it easier to hear. I have a model called PPRR, Problems and Possibilities, Resources and Restraints. And what I do there is to put something in the middle and ask, what problems might this give rise to? What problems might this resolve? What possibilities might this, whatever it is, open?
Right.
What possibilities might it close down? how and when is this a resource? How and when is this a restraint? So that I was putting them into the different quadrants. But when I did that, it kind of, say, hope, you might put that in as a resource and possibilities. But hope can be a restraint sometimes. If people keep hoping for something that isn't going to happen, that rise of hope and then the crash, rise of hope and then the crash can be a restraint to kind of accepting things as they are, not hoping for things that can't be. When you love somebody who doesn't love you, is that hope can be a real restraint to you to accepting the possibility of accepting things as they are. So when I put humor in the middle, my daughter helped me to put how and when is this a resource? How and when is a restraint? And that led me to move out of the story of myself as always humorous to sometimes thinking of a humorous response, but not saying it.
That's a really incredible model way to think about things, because not all of our experience or the emotions like hope or love that they're not so one-sided as we think they are. I think that's really helpful.
Like blame. Blame is usually put in as a problem and a restraint. Adopt a non-blaming approach as an absolute. But if you put blame in the middle, you can say, when and how is it a resource?
Right.
And sometimes when families have been blaming each other, I've said, it may be not obvious to me, but how is and when is blaming helpful to you? And they said it's helpful if it helps people to take responsibility. A boy has said, your mom's been blaming you for the abuse that you did to your sister. How is that useful to you or not useful? And he said, it's helpful if she's clear that it was my fault. When she begins to say, well, maybe it was your sister should have said this, maybe. He says, when she says that, that's not helpful. It's much more helpful if she's clear that it was my fault. And that helps me to work on being different.
Interesting.
So blame was a resource. So I don't think it's up to therapists to decide. What's what. You'd always put it in the middle and ask those questions.
Great questions to ask.
So that's who I am at the moment.
Yes. Yeah.
Somebody who tries to create models. And I use the problems, possibility, resources, restraint in conjunction with CMM. Problem running up the side of the hierarchy. And then how is this a problem at each of these levels? What's the possibilities at each of these levels? I've adopted, combined, developed a relationship between the models.
Yeah, those seem to be complementary to each other.
Yeah.
I asked the question of what's the story you're telling about yourself, or what is your story, or tell me your story, and knowing that there's not one story, there's not a story, and that, I could ask many different questions of what's the story you tell about yourself, but what's the story your daughter tells about yourself or your colleagues tell about you. But I think it is interesting the way people choose to respond, because it's easy to maybe to talk more definitively about other people or things outside of yourself. But I think it's a really good ability to be able to say, to know yourself and to be able to speak about what is true for you and to tell your story, not saying, oh, I need someone else to validate this or confirm this for me, but I know it to be true about myself. I feel similarly to you that I'm lucky that I get to study all of these different models and tools that aren't restricted to the professional side of my life, that I also get to apply for myself and increase the quality of my relationships and my communication through those.
Yeah.
Well, since you brought up CMM, maybe we could just jump into that, and you could tell us the story of how you first encountered CMM and the role it's had in your life, your professional and maybe your personal life, if it's shown up there.
1982, I think, was the time. And Kensington in London,
Mm-hmm.
in a church hall, 2 or 3 day workshop organised by an organisation called City Centre, which Peter Lang and Ros Draper were running, which was a independent therapy organisation. But at the very beginning, they were emerging, and
Right.
they organised this workshop. I don't know how they made contact. So Barnett Pierce and Vernon Cronin give this presentations about it, and then I think on day 2, a family come in, and my colleagues B.B. Speed and Philippa Seligman, the late Philippa Seligman, did an interview with this family. B.B. can't remember this. She says, I can't remember doing that. I said, yeah. It was really
Sticks
good.
with you, though. Sticks with you.
And so they did an interview that evening before the next day's workshop. Barnett and Vernon analysed that interview. Next day, they presented that interview. We went theory, then we went practice. Then we took that practice and put it into their theory.
Mm.
And so that was really important and impressive, the way they did that. And it really made the theory not come to life. That's right. Become a living thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, you can use this. I saw that interview and I've seen how they think about it. And that's so helpful.
Yeah.
To be able to think about that. And took me beyond my initial impressions of and then they explained, I think they did a strange loop with it and so on.
Yep.
So that was my first encounter with it. And I think I fell for it.
Yeah.
Then. And about them as people, they are approachable to see them. They did that in the evening at the party that we were at. And you usually get presenters who enjoy themselves and have done a day's work and things, but you saw them continue to work at it. Yeah. And I think that fits in with the work ethic from my working class background, which fitted for me. They kept on working, and the next day that they came, I was really impressed by all that.
Oh, absolutely. A number of the people I've talked to were able to first encounter CMM straight from Barnett and Vernon. Yeah. And I just think must be such a cool experience. I was never able to interact with Barnett Pierce before he passed away. I was, again, newer to this theory, but we talk about him so much and I get to read his work. And I just think that he seemed to have such an inspiring presence to people. Yeah.
And he was very kind. I wrote a paper called Approach, Method and Technique, which has been quite popular on courses as a framework. Mm-hmm. And I sent him that, and he wrote me which I've still got the letter. Oh. He wrote me a really positive, encouraging, and that was one of my first papers that I'd ever written.
Wow.
So that was in 1992. I published that, but he was so positive about it. So I was really pleased with how they did that. Mm. I also, in doing strange loops, I would work at them and so on. And I said to Vernon Cronin once when he was over, I said, Vernon, can you get all the strange loops to close? He said, oh, no, some just another. Oh, why didn't you spend so much time? But I thought that was probably a good investment. If he'd said not all of them close, I probably would have given up earlier on working with some. And then I think another main influence of mine, Carl Tom, he took on CMM and used it and analysed it. So my development was supported by somebody who I really admired taking it on and validated that. So I used that a lot. And I wrote about it in a book I wrote in 1986 about using it. So I was taken with it.
Yes.
Straight away.
And how has it continued to show up? How do you get to use it in your work or in your life?
Well, I don't know if you use this term in the States, cheeky.
Cheeky, yeah.
I'm a cheeky therapist, a cheeky trainer, and I'm a cheeky student. So Vernon said to me one night, he says, the levels are not fixed in name, number, or order. So you sometimes learn it in a particular way, and in different cultures, those levels will be changed around. Sometimes somebody's self-story is at the highest level.
Yeah.
And they go against their culture in their life. They say, I'm stepping out of that and doing something different. So I took that as freedom to play around with it. And so I've renamed some of the levels and reordered them, redescribed them. So added levels, I took that as freedom to do that. So the culture, I've split into culture and society. And the distinction I make, people might make different distinctions, but culture is the broadest frame in which we live, the patterns that we exist in, the rituals that we adopt, the freedoms and restrictions that we have. And every culture elevates certain truths or practices, they elevate certain ideas or practices to the level of truth or law. That to me is a society with law courts, schools, universities. The buildings in some ways show what a particular culture appreciates. Churches. But whenever I go to a place, I sometimes ask the taxi driver, I said, on the way to the hotel or something, can you take me past some buildings that you think are particularly important in your city? And I said, make it a trip, and some take you to churches. The number of churches and cathedrals that they have that are important. Some take you to universities, physical manifestations of values that are important in a culture. In Sweden, they call the hospitals the new cathedrals. The people, that's where what they believe in. Universities can be thought of the same.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
In the city that I come from, Newcastle, the football ground is on a hill. And they call it the cathedral on the hill, where people go to worship.
Right.
So that culture and society, so looking at the culture, the broader patterns, but the society, what the values of any culture raise to the level of truth or law. And then it had family story, or originally it had family myth. And I've changed that to stories about significant relationships, which is more expansive than family. Family's one significant relationship. It's not the only.
Yes, and people might have different experiences with family.
So I might ask somebody if they're talking about something. I say, who do you go to talk about this to? Now, I used to say, who in your family do you talk most to? So that was restricting it to family. Now I say, who do you go to talk about? Who's the first person you rang up to tell about? So who did you go around to tell, or who did you think to tell? And it might be family or a friend or a neighbor or somebody. So what's the significant relationship here in relationship to this? And so some people, I'll say, what are the things that you would never tell your family? But who would you tell about things that you would never tell your family?
Yeah.
So stories about significant relationships made it more expansive and inclusive and easier for people to answer.
I can see that.
Instead of life script, which seems singular, I say self stories or stories about self. So those stories might be stories, what you're doing now, stories you tell about yourself, stories that other people tell about you. Those are included. Life script seems to be a bit, at that time, I thought it was a bit narrow.
Yes, so, singular.
So I played around and renamed and presented it as coming from CMM, but with my take on it.
I think that's wonderful. The language that I've heard talking to enough people involved in the CMM Institute is that the goal is to be CMM-ish. Let it expand and grow and, be evolving. And that seems very CMM-ish to me.
Yeah. I still use the hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
So I refer to it as a heterarchy.
What does that mean to you?
So I got it from Joyce Scaife, who was a student on our course. And she, in her dissertation, had found this term. And a hierarchy is more fixed. The boss is the boss.
Uh-huh.
The workers are the workers. The managers are the managers. And a family tree is a family tree. That's the order in which they occurred biologically. And a heterarchy, I think it comes from radical feminism, or it's related to, I don't think heterarchy comes from, but that when a group faces an issue or a problem or a set of circumstances, a leader who has some knowledge and abilities in this emerges from the group as the leader in relationship to this task.
Mm.
And they become the leader because of their skills, their knowledge. When that task is over, that person goes back into the group.
Mm-hmm.
And they meet another task. So a heterarchy is an organization that might be clear in relationship to that task.
Yeah.
But in relationship to another task, somebody else might lead. So the organization in that moment is clear. We're taking the lead from you. Mm-hmm. We are da-da-da-da. And that's not to say that people can't contribute ideas. But I think that's the heterarchy that is a useful way to think about the levels. You know, sometimes an episode is so significant, it influences everything else.
Mm-hmm.
It influences how you think about your position in your culture, what you think about your religion, what you think about your life, that episode.
Yep.
And it might change things in that way, that implicative influence. So I played around with that.
Mm-hmm.
That helped me to develop something I call the actually not knowing position.
Okay.
Arlene Anderson said we should take a not knowing position. Even if we know stuff, we shouldn't use that as a basis. We should always be curious and explore.
Right. That's good.
Then the second not knowing position was when I worked with Queenie Harris, psychiatrist, Indian woman, Christian, and we're very different, but we worked together for 25 years. When Queenie worked with Indian families, sometimes they got frustrated with her curiosity.
Interesting.
They said something like, we knew we had to explain this to the white doctors, but we thought you might know something about this.
Interesting.
And so that was problematic. And then we developed for Queenie and then myself with white families, or any family that you had some similarities with, and they had expectations based on that similarity. The Queenie would say, you know, that you might think that I would know something about these situations that you're talking about, but I'm going to ask you some questions that make it seem like I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm doing that to make sure we're talking about your experience of these events and not mine.
Mm-hmm.
I do have experience of this, but I'm going to ask you some questions as if I don't.
Right. That seems very CMM-ish to me as well, with the meaning being attached.
Yeah. And it was a mystery that they couldn't understand the questions. So that was giving so as if not knowing position. So that allowed you to acknowledge your knowledge, but think this may not be the same as yours. So that was the second kind of a not knowing position. Then the actually not knowing position is that, say, in an exercise to help people to detach themselves, not be restricted by their knowledge of the content of what people are saying, and help the person to process their experience using CMM.
Mm-hmm.
I would ask you to think of something, and the students are working on this, to think of something that you have enjoyed in the last, you've been pleased with in the last. It could be something problematic, but in an exercise, I usually something that you've been pleased with in the last month or so. Okay. It doesn't have to be the world's most fantastic thing. So you would choose something, but I ask you not to tell me what it is. Mm. So I'm going to talk to you about this, but it's not with the idea of, I'm not trying to find out. I'm not trying to get you to tell me. I'm not trying to work it out what it is. I'm really not interested in that. I'm interested in the process. So I'd ask, were you alone when this happened? Did you plan for it? Did it happen spontaneously? When it happened, how long did it last? How long did it seem? What did it tell you about yourself? Who did you tell? You know, if there were some people in your culture here and listening to this, what might they be inspired about by knowing about this? Who would question it? Who would be more skeptical? So I'm using that and not knowing what that happened, but helping them to explore the experience. And people have said, when I've said, you don't have to tell me what it is, they've chosen something that's been important to them, and they're freer not to have to say
yes
to explore. So using CMM as a structure helps you to organize your not knowing and helps a person to experience things that happen to them. That happened, I used that first in sexual abuse, when some young woman said, I don't want to say what's happened.
Yeah.
I thought that was because of my gender. And I said to one young woman, you don't have to talk to me. It might be difficult to talk to me as a man. You can talk to one of my female colleagues. And one young woman said, it's nothing to do with you being a man. I don't want to tell anybody this.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell anybody what actually happened. And so it was in that moment, I said, I think I have a way of helping you to talk about it without what happened. Do you want to try that? And she said, okay. So I began to explore the influence on our friendships, what she hoped our family would say to her, who responded in a way that made her glad she told, who responded in a way that made her regret that she told, and so on. So that exploring like that.
Yeah, you really open up to just because someone doesn't want to talk about it or doesn't know how to talk about it yet, you can still help walk them through that processing and re-examining and trying to understand. And that's really cool.
That's a good way to walk them through it. Yeah.
Yeah. Outside of your work as a systemic therapist, what else are you passionate about?
Passionate about as a systemic therapist, or just passionate outside my work?
Outside of your work, I can tell that your work is a very important part of your life and who you are. But I think a traditional question that people ask when meeting each other, or trying to get to know someone, oh, what do you do?
Okay.
And we understand that means what's your job, but I want to stay away from just defining you by your job. So outside of your profession, I'd love to know what are other things that you're passionate about, family activities.
Yeah. Well, I'm a grandfather now, and I really passionate about to have as much involvement and time with my granddaughter. And I have 3 daughters, and I'm married to a woman after, I think it's nearly 40 years now. And we got a camper van a year ago or so when the lockdown happened. We're keen to do that, though we still both get so preoccupied with work that we don't use it enough. But so I'm keen, but not very good at doing other things. But I suppose individually, I'm an active triathlete. I've been a lifelong runner, and then about 10 years ago, I changed from running to triathlons. And so I had to relearn to swim. And that's great because I'm mixed with people who have nothing to do with my work.
Yeah.
Nothing. And they talk about life in quite a different way sometimes.
Yeah.
Some of them are exciting and interesting. Some of them are a bit difficult.
Sure.
And so I compete for Great Britain. I train a lot for that, swimming, biking, and running. So I'm passionate about that. And the competitive side of it was important to begin with, and that's becoming less so now.
Hmm.
There's the enjoyment of the activities itself and the social groups that you mix with and things like this. And the places, we're going to Bilbao.
Yeah.
We're having, a holiday there. And before, when I was going to things, the event was, the competition was the important thing,
Mm-hmm.
and the other stuff wasn't. But now we're going for a holiday, and I'm doing a duathlon in the middle of it. So I'm
Right.
more relaxed about it now.
That's good.
My wife's art I'm interested in.
Hmm.
She shifted out of work gradually, and I haven't. And she does art, and she has a room in our house, the room above this room, in which there are loads of paintings all in that room.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about art, but I really like her stuff, really do.
Yeah.
And so I'm passionate about getting her stuff out of the attic
Hmm.
and into the house. And
Yeah.
so a project. She's a bit shy about it, but
Sure.
I feel passionate about that. So
Yeah.
those are my main things outside of work.
Yeah. That's
But I'm
good.
still very busy with work.
Yeah. What does it mean to you to be a systemic therapist? Maybe as a literal definition for people who don't know what is a systemic therapist, but then what is, special to you that you enjoy?
God, that's a good question. And I know that's a trips off the tongue. People say, that's a really great question. But how I define a good question is I don't have an immediate answer to it.
That's fine.
Right? I know. And I really want to answer it.
Hmm.
That's what I define a good question as. If you ask a family a question, a reflexive question would be something that they can't answer immediately, but they want to answer it. So, systemic therapist, people ask questions like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
They ask questions that people don't have an immediate answer to,
Yeah.
but the person wants to answer it. It's important. Creating an answer to that question may be of some benefit,
Mm-hmm.
may extend their thinking and so on. I'll tell you about a family I just worked with last night where the young one was very upset with me. And we'd had a meeting. I have to keep this confidential, just describe the process from my point of view. She was upset, crying about the outcome of a meeting. She was angry at me for some of the things I'd said. Her parents were there, her mother was consoling her. So I have a phrase that in that moment, what it means to me to be a systemic therapist is trying to turn a crisis for the therapist into an opportunity for the client.
Mm.
How can I respond in a way that turns this to their benefit, not
Yeah.
be defensive,
Mm.
not try to justify, not try to, well, sometimes I do, but not to make that the prime interest,
Yeah.
but to turn this, what could be a crisis for me, into an opportunity.
Sounds hard to do.
It is. And I don't always live up to it. But
Sure.
that's one of the things I think a systemic therapist tries to turn a crisis for the therapist or the service into an opportunity for the client they when they criticize. It's easy to work with clients who are cooperative and not easy, but
Sure.
relatively so. But when clients don't like what you do,
Yeah.
when they challenge what you do, when what you've done with the best of intentions has the worst of effects,
Mm.
how do you respond to that in a way that keeps the therapeutic space open? Now, I know other therapists will do that as well, but I'm talking about from our point of view. It means staying relevant. The older I get, the more I worry about being relevant,
Mm.
especially to young people. But I think I use my age. I've been doing this for a long time. And so I'm in the social grace of appearance when people come in and look. I think, what is this old guy, this old white, know about this? So I'll make the most of that.
Mm.
I'll talk about tactic, and make deliberate errors in stuff, so they laugh at me. And that's in humor. I think the first person that should be laughed at is the therapist, and the first person you should laugh at is yourself. And I think that's how you introduce humor, to laugh at myself and invite them to laugh. And I think that softens the approach. And I think the systemic therapists, we've always been credited with introducing the unexpected. So one woman was crying after a disappointment that she wasn't going home as soon as she hoped. And I said, this may sound strange, but I'm glad that you're crying. I'm glad to see that you're so upset. Now, that's unexpected. You would expect to be sympathetic, say you're sorry, to apologize, to try and comfort. And so I found myself saying that. And she said, well, that's going to take some processing, isn't it? And I said, yes. I said,
yep.
Do you know why? Why might I be pleased? I know it sounds strange, believe me, but why might I be pleased that you were so upset at hearing that news today? And then she generated 5 reasons why I might be pleased to see that she was upset. I had 2.
Yeah.
By not giving mine and saying, why might I be? And generating curiosity. Chekine said to try and generate a curiosity in the mind of the therapist. I also think it's important to generate curiosity in the mind of the client.
Absolutely.
It might be about you and what you do.
Yeah.
So she generated those. And she went out still upset, but she had a different story about that upset. I didn't try to stop her from being upset. It was entirely understandable, appropriate she was upset. Her hopes had been dashed in that meeting. Had a different story about being upset. She was upset because she wanted to do these things, because she was ready to go home, because she was confident in her family were ready to have her home again. Her friends were missing her and she was missing her friends. She had a life ready to go back to. That's why I'm upset. So I didn't try to stop her from being upset, but to create a different story around it. There's other things about being a systemic therapist, but I think that's part and parcel.
Yeah, I think that's really incredible and a really good skill to be able to have. That really is like, you have to practice it, being able to lean into places of discomfort or things that are not the easy option, but maybe, ultimately the better option for you. And I think that's part of what I want to encourage with this podcast is developing those kind of skills for people, giving them the language to be able to talk about the things they're experiencing. And so I wonder personally in your work, how you approach those complex moments of dissonance or tension, like complex ideas or feelings in spaces. How do you lean into those?
That's another really good question. It's a question I've thought about a lot. And one of the things I think is that thinking beautiful thoughts do not necessarily lead you to do beautiful things.
Yeah.
The theories are fine, but as therapists, we have to do something with it. We can't just talk a lovely theory. Theories can help to shift us. I remember Barnett Pierce saying that he thought theorists were the therapists for therapists.
Interesting.
He said that we give you therapists a new theory or a different take, and you get excited, he said. And then you turn it into practices and questions and things like this. He said, after a while, you get bored with it. So we have to come along with a new thing. Oh, what will we do with this? So he says, we keep you excited.
That's good.
And then you turn what we do into something practical. So I have some things about that relationship between the esoteric and the practical. And I think coming from a working class background, and my particular family story is I wanted to be good at something.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't want to be a generalist. And I was very purist to begin with. When I was doing something, I was doing something wholeheartedly. And I practiced and practiced and practiced till I could do it well. And so it wasn't enough for me to have people saying things, I'm curious about this and I'm wondering about that, which is a lovely stage. And then what are you going to do with that curiosity? How are you going to translate that into something that you can do? People in a way that might have a chance of them changing things. Let's go with CMM. So one phrase I have is think theory and talk ordinary. Now, ordinary is ordinary for the people that you're working with, which means, so there's no a singular ordinary way. If I was talking to you, what's ordinary to you might be CMM. So I could talk to you in CMM language.
Yeah,
so,
in a way it's accessible for people. Yeah.
So I'm talking a language that you understand. If I'm talking to somebody else who has no idea about CMM, I listen to their language and I think CMM, but I'm talking in a way that. So
yeah,
well, this couple I was working with where physical violence, a man had been violent towards a woman. At one stage in the therapy, this wasn't the first session, but I had them stand up in the middle of the room and had him raise his fist, ready to punch. And she was standing. And we talked about this and she was okay to do this. And to have him like this, I said, this is at the point where you could decide to punch or not to punch. You can still decide. This is at that point in the process. At this point, let's imagine, so they're both standing up in the middle of the room. Let's imagine in that corner of the room, there are 10 people, 10 men from a culture that you regard as your own. So I wasn't saying what culture he was from. He could have all sorts of different people in his culture. So let's imagine 10 men from a culture that you regard as your own, and you turn to them and say, shall I hit or shall I not hit? So in that moment, I'm collapsing culture as an abstract concept into this decision.
Yeah.
And I said, so what would they say? And he said, they would tell me to hit. I said, why would they tell you that? He said, any woman that speaks to me like that can expect, okay, so that's what you think they would say. That's what you think. Not necessarily what they would say, but what you think. And I said, a couple of sessions ago, when we were talking about how you see yourself as a person at the self-story level, didn't say that to him, but you regarded yourself as a leader, not a follower. He says, yeah. I said, I'm a leader, not a follower. I said, so I'm wondering why you would follow what the other men would do. But when you think of yourself as a leader, why are you following what other men would do? So that's what in systemic terms, you talk about a contradiction with therapeutic potential.
Yes.
So what if you were to turn to those men and lead about not hitting? Because you said you don't want to hit.
Yeah.
You find yourself hitting and then regretting. So you don't want to. How would you lead them? They may not follow you, but how would you? So that's thinking theory and talking ordinary, turning something from abstract concepts to them. Then what about your children in that corner of the room? And you ask them, what would they tell you? So you're bringing the outside world into, using the different levels, but by people sitting in a corner of the room, by the children in the corner of the room, by bringing all sorts of different things. What about you as a younger man standing in that corner? And you ask, how would they help you to make a decision? So we're talking about decisions. And then he said his arm was beginning to ache. And I said, no, keep it there, keep it there. And he said his shoulder was aching for quite a few days after that. And I think that reminded him of the embodied experience. The thinking, the abstract thinking and so on, and the practical ways, how you role plays. I still role play on my own. And if I've got something, I think it's ethical not to do or say something for the first time with a client, if you can. So if I'm going to ask a particular question, the kind of questions that I was just saying then, I know this is going to sound strange, but I was quite pleased to see you upset.
Yep.
I rehearse asking that kind of question. And then what I do is to imagine different responses. What if she responds like this? What will I say? What if she responds like this? What will I say? I try to imagine multiple responses and then try to think, how might I do this? With the intent of having her be glad that she responded, not regret. So how can I maintain therapeutic potential, whatever she says? So I'm ready in that way. She might always respond in ways which I don't understand.
Right.
But I try to prepare myself.
Yeah. I think what you're getting at is something, I had a conversation in another episode with Alex Jagiello, who was one of the fellows for the CMM Institute. And she did a project and she had some really great language around this process of starting with imagination, then genuine inquiry, and then embodiment. And that seems to be what you're talking about too, where you do have to start from this place of imagination. It's a really important step to let yourself spend time imagining the outcomes or imagining what could be. Because if you are given these narratives or these stories that you've internalized, like your client you just talked about has these deeply internalized patterns or messages that he's received, forgetting that he has a choice, you know? And so if you can imagine a different way of being, that's huge to begin with. And then you bring in the genuine inquiry, which is the curiosity, you know, and the gentle kind of leading or bringing other people into the conversation or asking questions of yourself. And then you embody what you imagined. And so if you have shied away from leaning into potentially uncomfortable situations, even if they're moments that could bring about growth, but you imagine yourself leaning in and begin to realize that you could be making a different choice. And then embody that. I think that's a wonderful way to be able to approach moments of dissonance where it's really easy to want to turn back.
That's a lovely way to describe that. I like that a lot.
All right, my fellow communicators, that's all for part 1 with John Burnham. But don't worry, there will be a part 2. That'll be our next conversation episode to come out. Our next turn today is to take anything from this conversation that really speaks to you and try to use it as a lens to see your own life through and your own communication and your own relationships and your own actions. I think the PPRR model is definitely one I'm going to start using to really start to see how layered and complex everything we do is. Or if it's helpful to you, using John's version of the hierarchy model from CMM, using the different definitions of culture and society, close relationships, and self-stories. I think those are all great tools for reflecting and trying to understand yourself, your communication within context, or any other number of things that we discussed today. So again, this is just part 1. Part 2 will be our next conversation episode. Thank you so much for showing up. Thank you for being curious. And thank you for being a part of this dialogue with me. That's all for today. See you next time.